Welcome to Delightful Dissent. It's episode 34, and we're going to be talking today about fitting in. And this is definitely something that's really relevant to me. I've spent a lot of time and effort trying to fit in and adapt. And I think in many ways it's been a strength, but it's also sometimes been really exhausting, and it's definitely got in the way. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this one. And today's guest is Anne Skinner, who's aka Anne the Heartworker, coach and creative. So welcome to the show, Anne. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to today.
Yeah, me too. So if you're new to Delightful Dissent, this is kind of an idea that came up through my working with people who are taking a different approach to things, going their own way. And is one of those people, as are many of my guests. And one of the big things I find with doing this kind of work is that there are a lot of kind of hidden barriers that are really the implicit beliefs and the deep assumptions that aren't really considered, but are just part of the fabric of how we think about things. This show is about challenging some of those and re-investigating some of those, finding out where they're true and where they're not true. It's about really, and I want to give you some ideas, and I want to like specific things, but really, perhaps more importantly, it's about what it is to do this kind of assumption challenging work. And I want everyone to be able to do that, to explore these edges when there isn't an easy answer yet, and when stuff's a bit fuzzy and a bit strange and doesn't quite work out yet. And the show's called Delightful Dissent because, yeah, we're challenging things. We're saying, actually, no, it's not true right now. But it's not about kind of proving the other side wrong. It's not about proving ourselves right beyond everything else. It's about playing with this stuff, joyfully exploring what the better possibilities are, rather than being about like winning and proving everyone else wrong. So it's hopefully at the end we end up somewhere happier than we started, as well as maybe slightly wiser, but you know, that's quite a high bar. So this show is genuinely live. We may talk about challenging and personal things, so there may be difficult topics coming up. If that's an issue for you, then please be aware. There may also be strong language, and again, if that's an issue for you, then please be aware. There aren't any perfect answers here. This is about us asking questions, and it's about you asking questions too. So if you're watching there, please do, and watching live, please do ask questions in the comments, and we'll bring them in, and we can explore them with you. If you're watching the recording, there will be information about how to get in touch with either of us and ask those questions and continue that conversation at the end of the show. So yeah, I first met Anne after she reached out, and I asked for some people in a group to be on the show, and she reached out, and we had a really great, really lovely conversation, and I was really struck by really how comfortable and skilled she was at working with the kind of unexpected and different, and playing with those edges, because that's not always something that people are comfortable with, and I really enjoy it. It's so much fun for me to be with someone else who likes to do that as well. So I really wanted to get her on the show, and I think the topic we've landed on is great for this. So yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about your work and who you like to work with, please?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a coach and a creative. So coach is quite a broad description, isn't it? And I think I've morphed into sort of a life coach, a guide even. I'm not even sure if the word coach completely encompasses it. But I help people really to find their way in life. Those that are lost, a lot of those are feeling like they're no longer fitting in, or they're feeling pushed out or whatever. So I help a lot of those people. I certainly was one of those. The ones that really lost themselves by trying to fit in. And I'm a creative as well, and that's a huge part of my work. And initially there were two separate things, and now I've kind of morphing them, and the creativity is coming into my work as a life coach and guide, and helping people come home to themselves through creativity is a part of what I do.
That's lovely. I love that the weaving together of the different aspects. I think is it's a hard thing, but it's a huge thing, and I think it's really great to hear, and it's such a powerful thing when you manage to bring it together. I think it's brilliant, and it does, that spark of creativity in whatever we do is so powerful. So yeah, thank you.
It's massive. It's changed my life, I really have to say. I only became a creative, an official creative, about 3-4 years ago, and it just changed everything. It changed the whole way I thought about fitting in, even. Yeah. So I'm so excited to be exploring this subject with you today. Yeah,
me too. I think though I am very excited, before we do get in, I do like to ask people for a quote that kind of, gives a bit of support. It can be difficult, going against the grain whenever you're doing anything like this, and getting some support from someone else and a different perspective is always, for me, is a nice way to start. So you got something that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, when you asked me for a quote, I had to sort of really scratch my head, and I thought I'll just leave it and see if one just comes and floats past, and one did. And
Excellent.
I picked on it, and I just thought it's absolutely, in fact, more than one did, but this is the one that I really had to think about. And it's a quote by Maya Angelou, and I'm not sure if you've heard it before, but it says, you only are free, or you're only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place, no place at all. The price is high and the reward is great. It's quite a complicated one, isn't it? It's a real thinker. You're only free when you realize you belong no place, and you belong every place and no place at all. And I stopped and I thought, I for some reason, I felt it in my being, as in I resonated with it, as in that is exactly how I'm experiencing it now. But I didn't always experience it like that. I was always feeling like I didn't belong. It's always different. So the knowledge that now I know I belong, both belong and don't belong at the same time, in no place or every place, is actually, it's a really, really helpful knowing. Yeah, it's a really helpful thing to trust that. I don't know if you'd heard it before, and if that means
no, I haven't. And I really, it really speaks to me on that there's something about the belonging not being attached to being too attached, it's not belonging if you must be there. You need to have there's a freedom in belonging that kind of includes not belonging. And I think it's really, really interesting with that, that how fitting in sits alongside this idea of that kind of belonging. It's like, do I feel like I belong is an interesting question for me, because I don't very often. So it's a really powerful one.
And it's like you're saying, it's a feeling, isn't it? I feel like I don't belong. And I still, to this day, you're thinking, goodness me, I'm 55, I should know better by now. But to this day, I'll still be in a group of people, and particularly when they all know each other quite well and they just get on, and I come in as a fairly, like a newish person, I always get this little moment of, how can I make sure I'm going to fit in and be part of this group for them to let me in. I'm sure it goes to my childhood when we used to move a lot, and you would always be the new girl at school. And, there's a part of you that doesn't want to be the new girl. It's interesting on the one hand. So I kind of liked it. Maybe it fed my need for significance probably, and this need to be different. And on the other hand, I didn't want to be the new girl because I wanted to be the person who was part of the group. And that, I think there's always been a tension between the two. And I really clearly remember a little meetup not too long ago where I was listening to people and I was laughing just a little too loudly, and that's just, I recognized in myself, I do this because I want to belong. I want to show them that I find that funny, and I think, they're really great, and I want to be part of it. And when I notice it in that moment, and I find that really annoying because I wish I didn't, but I'm just so aware of that I then have to come back to myself where the real true belonging is. But I forget that when I'm around others. I do. It's easier when I'm on my own or when I'm with one or two people. But when it becomes a group, there is something that inside of me goes, and I have to breathe into that discomfort. It's discomfort.
Yeah, interesting. I'd never really identified that in myself in that way, but when you say it, I very much resonate. There's something about bigger groups than one or two that is really hard to negotiate. I think I have if I reflect on it, there's a fear isn't quite the right word. Maybe it is. There's a pull around like being uncovered as being different. As being. And I think this is, one of the difficulties of being very good at fitting in is you can kind of get away with it for a long time.
Yes.
And particularly, for me, and this is one of the things a lot of neurodivergent people, myself included, struggle with is we look normal. We don't look like a whatever. And then we do something really odd. And people are like, ooh, ooh. And there's a very difficult thing to negotiate where people have read you as something and then effectively have misread you. And one of the real difficulties is that actually people call these things hidden things. They could be cultural differences too. But if you actually have any of the differences, or if you attend to them, one of the things is they're not hidden. They're just subtle. But they're there because it's there in the idea of gaydar, for example. It's not hidden. It's just that most people don't notice. And I think that, and then people are offended on some level that you kind of lied to them, but you haven't, because they misread you and you were transparent. And it's a really interesting thing to negotiate.
It is. And as you're speaking, I'm even at the same time, I'm thinking, so am I neurodivergent? I don't experience myself as such. I have a lot of people that I know who are, and who are in my network, or I even work with. But I find that difficult to even, to me, that's putting it in a box, but it's in society, it can be a very helpful and useful thing to understand the differences. Whilst they're all the same, it's also, there are differences. To have both be possible at the same time, I sometimes find difficult. I remember working with a lady who was gay. You mentioned gaydar, right? And as in colleagues, we were colleagues, and we'd worked together for at least 6 months. And at one stage we sat, and she came up with this conversation. She said, "I'm sure you know that, you must know that I'm gay." And I'm like, "No, I had no idea you're gay." And really, because truly it made no difference to me. And so for me, I hadn't been measuring that. So I hadn't been looking at the behavior around that. And she was really shocked that I didn't know. But I was like more shocked, as in, it doesn't really matter to me. What is that? I don't know. That's not wrong?
Yeah, it's a really interesting that like when the difference doesn't come up just because it wasn't pertinent, right? It just never. Right. And I think there's some people seem to derive comfort in like knowing a person, in the sense that they understand them and they can kind of predict, they kind of get where they're coming from. And I think when you diverge from that unexpectedly, it can be really challenging. But for me, it is difficult when you're just like, oh right, okay, well, it just wasn't relevant. And that's also a difficult thing if it's a valued part of someone's identity. And this it's like, well, I didn't notice because it doesn't matter in that sense. It's because it wasn't relevant yet. It's a different thing. Yeah.
In the context, I think I'm really glad you are actually picking that up, because it was all about context, like everything is. Of course, if you're gay and you're you're having to travel, for example, massively a challenge, right? So I can't speak for the challenges of the person with the divergent, but as somebody who is in context dealing with it, there's no, like, that makes no difference. So context is hugely important. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one, and I think it's also it also plays into one of the things we've talked about, fitting in, and it's almost like fitting into boxes. And in the run up to this, to going live, I always talk to my guests, and we were actually talking about the intro and how hard it can be to introduce yourself in a way that lands for people and that feels really resonant. And that does feel like a fitting into a box exercise on some level.
Yes.
And it really does. I think if there's a certain kind of normal constellation of things that all go together, that often occur together. And so you're like, okay, if this person is that, then they're also that, and they're also that, and they're also that. And that's actually quite reliable. For most people, it's kind of true. You can kind of predict quite a lot from relatively small. But for those of us where it isn't, where it doesn't all line up in that straightforward way, it gets really, really tricky. And the whole fitting in and not fitting in thing becomes a really blurry line. So that's why I really like that quote, because it captures the kind of weird dichotomy going on there.
And sometimes, you may look very, very normal, like you said. I'm reminded, as she's speaking, I'm reminded of being a participant in a training. And that was a moment where I felt incredibly divergent, because she set us all up to do something. And then I think we even had to close our eyes and then open our eyes and do something. Everybody stepped back. I stepped forward. And this happened a few times in that training. And I felt awful, because also in that group of people, there were some challenges. I felt unsafe in that group of people. And in fact, I ended up in that particular instance. Later on, I had a clash there, and I ended up leaving there under a cloud. I had a really, really bad experience from it, and it just showed you I was different in that group. Didn't mean that they were wrong or I was right. It was just I did not always understand them, and they did not always understand me. And I found that very, very difficult and made me feel unsafe. And I felt. Yeah, it felt really, really hard. And I remember the trainer saying to me, because I went to her, I said, I don't understand any of, I seem to get it wrong all the time. And she said, no, Anne, you're not getting it wrong. You're just having a different look at life, and you experience life differently. And actually that is not, that can be a really good thing. And as a creative, there's nothing better than being able to have a different perspective. Or even as a coach, it's a really, really good tool to have, isn't it? To be able to look at life, have the ability to see all of the different levels, and none of them are wrong.
Yeah, I mean, perspective means that we can work with problems that can't be solved other ways. And there's you step to one side, and then you can, it's always one of those weird experiences, when you're stuck with something, you talk to someone about it. And I think when I talk to someone, I often end up occupying a bit of their perspective anyway, and I often work it out as I'm talking to them, because I've kind of picked up how they're thinking, and that's what I needed. But that step to the side is a really powerful thing, and some that's often what we're offering people when we're coaching them or working with them or consulting with them on this kind of thing. But it does still need to meet people kind of halfway. This is the challenge of it, is that you feel something, you sense something that's kind of different. You experience something differently, but then there's got to be getting it out there skillfully and in a way that feels good, in a way that feels consistent. Because one of the real difficulties is you don't get any practice doing this, because if you learn to mask it, which many of us do, it kind of does, when it does come out, it kind of splurges out very unskillfully, because we haven't had the practice, and we've got all of this kind of pent up stuff and all of this stuff. So it can be a really difficult thing to negotiate, even though you do have the perspective and you do have this unique way to sense into something. That doesn't necessarily follow that you will immediately be able to use it really well. Sometimes, in fact, it might be counterproductive.
Very, very true. And that actually, I know in our last conversation, we were talking about being in the middle and being on the edge. And so when you are having trouble disassociating yourself from other people, because that's sometimes what happens, isn't it? You lose yourself in the crowd. You can't communicate who you are. You can't communicate even what you mean because you're absorbing everybody else. It's really hard then to stay yourself and to be yourself. And then you're not fitting in. You're blending in. You're not even belonging. You're not even there.
Kind of lose yourself.
You lose yourself. And that's really how I have experienced it, which is why it's really important for me not to stay in the center for too long. I have to be on the edge. And I've really questioned this in myself. Is this right? I should be able to be in the center and in the middle of the group. It's not to say that I can't be, but it depends on my role. And most of the time, if I'm a great observer, and that's where I'm strong. When I'm in the center, I sometimes lose that ability to observe. And then I go from observing to absorbing. That's interesting, isn't it? I've just made that little link, but that's how I feel. So it's very important for me to then go to the edge. And I notice how that translates even when I choose a house. The house, I hate being in a middle of it's got to be on the edge or standing by itself on a corner house. Or if it's in a row, then it's got to be two on the, I have to have a sense of space around me. And because I feel otherwise quite claustrophobic in that. And people who know me, who've watched me and who've experienced me through life may be really surprised at this. Because I can be quite, but being in the center of, I can be like that as well, but don't leave me there for too long.
It's really interesting. You make me think. So, and this might sound like a funny thing for someone who speaks for a living, amongst other things, to say, I really don't like being the center of attention. I find it very uncomfortable. Whenever I am, I spend most of my time thinking about how I can shift the spotlight onto someone else. So it's a really interesting thing to be in that space and to kind of negotiate that, the attention, the awareness, and when people are aware of you, and what that means. And I think this really gets to this. So one of the things that really bothers me around a lot of the conversations around this is this focus on inclusion, and that's sufficient, because inclusion is still different. It's that thing where, like, if you're included, you're like, people are like, well, yeah, you're different, but you're welcome. That always feels slightly vulnerable, and not in a good way. It's brittle, perhaps, is a better word. It can always be revoked. Can always be taken away if you do something like, oh, right, no, you're not one of us after all, right, bye. And I think for many of us, we've had that experience. It's like, okay, oh no, actually. Whereas belonging feels like something much more shared, where we're, it's like, where if you differ from the norms, then the norms move too. It's like, well, then okay, so it kind of becomes a different thing. It's like you're not being compared to something that doesn't include you.
It's very interesting, this because if it's like somebody has to make a conscious choice to let you in, but it's on their terms, isn't it? That's what we're talking about. That's inclusion on their terms. And that can sometimes be helpful to create opportunity for mixing, maybe. It's not wrong, but we've got to create some awareness around how that works. And belonging, therefore, here's the thing, what I think about belonging. I don't think it's got anything to do with external stuff at all. Belonging to me is all about the internal work. We belong from our heart, it's a heart matter, not a head matter. And I know when I'm not feeling like I belong, it means that I'm disconnected. I'm in my heart, in my head. When I'm in my heart, I always feel belonging because I belong to myself in that moment. I am grounded in myself. I am feeling myself. I am in myself. And then I feel the courage of my heart. I'm able to be vulnerable. I'm able to speak my truth. But when I'm disconnected, which is easy for me to do when I'm in an environment where I'm not feeling 100% safe, then I will never feel true belonging, even when I'm fitting in. And yeah, so go on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And I think I've never quite made the differentiation, but yeah, there are spaces that I've kind of fit in where I don't feel I belong. It's actually quite a common experience for me.
Yes, that makes sense to me.
I actually had that. Actually, it's interesting. I had this experience going back to the small city that I spent quite a lot of time growing up in, and had this really strange, uncomfortable being welcomed experience where people were very pleasant and very open and very well. But I had this weird sense, and I realized it was because, first of all, when I left, I wasn't welcome. When I was when I was a teenager and I left, that wasn't that. And second of all, if people could completely read me, could read the other stuff, I don't think I'd have been welcome there either. And so it was this really strange kind of like, well, yeah, I kind of fit in on the surface, but I don't belong. And it was so it can go both ways, I think, and that's a really interesting idea,
because you can belong and not fit in at the same time, right? But you're talking about like being with groups of people, and I'm thinking I can be with group of people that are very similar to me and still don't feel like I belong. Whereas I can be with a group of people where everybody is different. I used to sail, and when you get a group of sailors together, you can't get often, when it not the racing sailors, but the proper listen to me, the proper sailors. I mean, the ones that are doing it because they love it beyond a sport. You can't get a more different group of people. You'll have the banker next to the cleaner, to the PR girl, to the school teacher. They're all hugely different, different genders, different divergence, all of it. It's all a mixed bag, and even disabled or not. But they have this thing to get in common. And it kind of binds them. And in that moment, you can feel complete true belonging. That to me is community spirit. It has nothing to do with all being the same. In fact, everybody is hugely different. And for a long time, I thought I need to feel belonging with people who are the same as me. And I realized that that's not actually where true belonging necessarily fits. It could be, and it can. And certainly I have found a level of safety in that somebody finally understands what I'm talking about in the thing that I need to learn, and I dare to be vulnerable there. So it has a different thing. It's more for growth, but to stay there is not healthy. For true belonging and community, I think we need a whole diverse mixed bag, because we all need aspects of each other. And that is really, I think, important when we're trying to think about belonging rather than fitting in. We're trying to change ourselves to fit into a different jacket. Oh my gosh, I've worn some jackets in this life that were not mine to wear, and I've taken off many layers of different jackets, and who knows, there might still be another one there for me to really show a part of me that I haven't shown. But Brené Brown, this is another quote I wanted to bring in that also came to mind. And I think it fits here beautifully, because she says, stop going through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong, because you'll always find it. And that was such a little eye-opener to me, because that's what I was doing. I was looking at the world going, I don't belong. I don't belong. And I will always find proof that I don't belong. And the moment I stop asking that or say that, actually my belonging increases.
Mm.
This is why I think I genuinely I feel that the belonging is what's happening inside of me, how I view the world. There's always two sides to this, isn't it? But how I experience life, I certainly have a lot to do with that. And I'm learning not to go through life saying I am different, I'm all the time, even though I recognize my differences, and that's powerful too, but not see them. If I then say I therefore don't belong, it means that I'm creating separation, and that's why I'm learning how I do that, how I deal with the separation that I've created in my life, regardless of what everybody else is doing.
You make me think of the conversation earlier in the conversation. We were talking about that the bits that just aren't relevant, aren't pertinent, and it feels a little bit like that. I certainly feel this, like when you identify as different in a group, you almost, I certainly kind of sometimes feel this urge of like self-explanation, self-justification, and you need to kind of explain it all ahead of time to make it safe. And actually it's like, well, half of like, this isn't relevant. Like you were saying in the example of the sailing, is like, well, it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter to what we're doing now. And I think there's something really interesting in that, and that, like, it's okay. And I think part of belonging for me, rather than the fitting in, feels like, well, if it does come up, if it does become a thing, then we'll handle it. That's what makes it a safe space.
Nice.
Because I think that's the other side of it. Yes, you can establish belonging in yourself, but when you do that, there will be spaces you walk away from because it's not a space for you that's healthy for you.
That's true.
And I think that's a really interesting thing for anyone who's holding a space, creating a space, to consider, is like, am I actually excluding people on that basis? And it's that ability to negotiate the difference when it does come up. I think that really sets belonging apart, and on both sides, because one of the things that you certainly deal with if you are operating differently is you adapt automatically. So most of the time, in most conversations, I'm partially adapted to talk to people in a normal way, which is absolutely fine. That's part of what it is to be slightly different. It's a bit like if English isn't your first language, it always takes slightly more effort.
Tell me about it.
Exactly. But it's fine, and it's like, it's not a thing. But what then happens is, if people then ask you get this thing where people are like, well, why won't you compromise? It's like, I've already met you at my point, at my limit, and now you want me to go over my limit. So you'll do some of this. It's actually quite an interesting thing. And I think for people who are inviting people into space and trying to create a space, understanding where people are already adapting just to be in there, are already trying to fit in, is a really important part of holding a space and designing a space that's really equitable and can foster belonging at all.
Yeah, very true. Which is what we do in our work a lot, right? As I say, I use my creativity in the work, and we have group sessions together where you then bring also that creativity into it. And I feel that actually gives a lot of permission also in showing an aspect of you that doesn't always get seen, the one that is hard to explain with words. You can do it with visuals so much easier, and it can express your feelings. And you can bring that in a safe space and have a very different point of view or a different aspect. But the interesting part is, when the space is safe, that is important and necessary to be heard and witnessed by others too. And then you'll find that everybody is reflecting a little part of each other, actually. And through that, you create belonging, even though there's difference. I find that really Yeah, beautiful.
I really like that idea of, you know, the differences and the different things going to kind of co-create that space. And yeah, for me, the root of belonging is that collective. It's that we are all telling the story. We are all drawing the pictures. And they're all part of the work, all part of the Gestalt, rather than there's that bit and then there's the rest. Yeah. which is kind of what we mean by inclusion. And it's actually a very different experience.
And how does that translate in real life then?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. Practically implementing it is actually quite hard. And understanding where your edges are can be quite hard. I think one of the big challenges of this is everyone's working, like, first assumption has to be that everyone experiences the world like they do. Yeah. Where else could you start? I mean, you have to start from there. I know obviously it's an assumption that doesn't last very long, but we kind of always return to. And so how do we work outside of our own experience? And I think that is a really big question. And I think one of the real values of creative expression and art is its ability to put ourselves in someone else's perceptive frame that way. So it can say, well, I don't experience the world quite like you do, but I can get a sense of what being that way is when I share whatever your art is. And I think that is such a powerful thing, and being able to both do that and open to that from others feels like a really a top level. I think we can go into some more specific details, but at a high level, I think that feels like an interesting way to start with that for me. How about you?
Yeah, well, creativity is one of the things that help me understand more about belonging. I'm a doodler, and you can see behind me, and I noticed that when in the space of doodling, creating art, drawing, whatever you want to call it, I go into that space where I always like to describe it as I meet myself, my true self there. And when I do that, that's when I'm in true belonging state, because you can't live there. But it's in that moment I can actually really express myself in all my glory. And it's not right, it's not wrong, it doesn't even have to be pretty, it doesn't even have to say anything. But I listen to myself there. And I can actually have space for myself there and I meet myself and not make myself different there. And that's really interesting for me. Then sharing the work as well is another layer, because it then brings a response. Initially an internal response, like, I used to like, what will people think of this? But actually I got really fast. That's not really of interest to me anymore, in terms of, I'm not worried that they're criticizing it. More like, how does this help them see something or feel something? And then it becomes a whole different thing. And I think through art, we can really create belonging beyond fitting in, because then you can go, well, if you are fitting in, you want to do something exactly the same that I do. When I teach doodling, and so when I teach doodling, I will always be saying to people, please don't copy me. I'm just giving you some tools, but the whole point of this is that you express yourself honestly. And it doesn't have to be good. There's no rules to this. The only thing I'm doing is I'm showing you the basics, the foundation for you to go off and do your own thing. And that, because when you're trying to copy me, you're trying to fit in. That's what you're trying to do in that moment, right? And when you're doing that, part of you separates and you actually feel like you're not belonging, because you're not doing your own expressive self, right?
I think it's really, you make me think of is it the Picasso quote about genius steals? That idea that you make it your own. You can take inspiration, you can take some of that from other people, and but you integrate it with your own, you make it your own. And there's no shame in that. There's no, that's the that's in many ways, you know, that people say imitation is the highest form of flattery. And it's an interesting one. It is flattery. It's empty.
It's
because actually taking it on is the real compliment.
Mm.
You know, when someone really integrates it and makes it part of their own thing, that's a very different order of compliment to just copying it.
That's it. But to come back to the subject, fitting in, when you're basically we're then applying the rules to something that should be that is not about rules but about self-expression. And as the moment we're adding rules to that that aren't our own, then we'll lose our sense of belonging, and we will never fit in, or never feel like we're fit in either. And that's the authenticness. We will always belong when there's a true authenticity to it, right? But as soon as there is a slight hiding of that authentic self, there's an edge there, isn't there? And then someone will feel insecure around you, perhaps even in certain ways, and then that will create a distance and a separation. And then there's no fitting in, and then you'll try really hard.
It's really interesting. Yeah, you make me think about this. You know, that in the self-expression, if I reflect on my own kind of, you know, why I resist, why there's resistance to kind of full self-expression, it's partly around the kind of rejection, but it's perhaps less around rejection than awkwardness. You know, that weird, like, okay, they don't get me. Okay, I need to explain myself. Now I need to explain this. And there's something really powerful in that around, like, actually being in a space where that's okay, where you can have that tension, you know, and then work to resolve that tension. That feels like a really, really different thing. And it's an interesting thing just to put yourself in that place where you can do it even for yourself. Because I think, you know, it's so easy to internalize this stuff. Most people are kind of judging themselves just on almost everything. I certainly spent a lot of time judging, like prejudging. It's not that helpful. Yeah. We
all do, I think. It's becoming creating awareness around that is where we win, isn't it? I know I listened to the last conversation with Ruben. You were talking about awareness as well. That's part of the work that we do, isn't it? And I genuinely think that creativity helps us create awareness, and sharing our creativity and being very vulnerable with that creates another layer to it, and meeting our edge there is really, really helpful too. I just noticed there is a comment from Sherry. So when people are learning, they copy. This is in reference, I think, to what you were saying, but sometimes they don't really know the difference, but they haven't found themselves yet. Yeah. So it's not, being a genius is about stealing. It's about ultimately morphing it into, using your own energy to change it to suit you.
I agree, though. Certainly my experience is like having the sense, having the energy, but not having a good way of expressing it, and actually learning the ways that other people expressed it, and being like borrowing from those. Those are the bits that I steal.
Well, it can be helpful. Yeah, it can be helpful to find your own voice with it, right? That's the thing. But we can't steal somebody else's voice, but we can help other people's words to find our own voice.
Exactly. And we can look at the way that they use their voice, where it may be similar to ours, or maybe it may be different, in ways that we might also like to use.
Yes.
That we may also find more helpful than the ways that we are currently using. I think that's the essence of the that edge around copying versus and I think almost, you almost develop that over time, partly by repeating, copying, being with others, understanding, and that's where that ability to sincerely express yourself actually develops, almost in the imitation. There's a sincere imitation, and then there's fitting in.
Mm.
as well.
Yeah, well, that's it. And that comes back to why I feel that creativity is so crucial when it comes to understanding belonging. When you try to create to fit in, your work is never going to be as good enough as when you let go of that thought, because you will never ever create an authentic voice that actually has meaning and that will create change and have impact. My view. Okay, maybe you have a different view about that, but that's how I feel about it and how I experience it. And that means you require an inner acceptance about that, to dare to do that, to let go of the need to fit in. You know how they say, be Marmite or whatever. I'm not talking about that, because I think that is just being Marmite to create a response, as in, if you don't know that expression, is not everybody loves Marmite, and if you're Marmite, then you will at least, you'll be clear on your point of view. It's not about that. It's about being honest.
Yeah, there's something somewhat defended, at least, or dishonest in that contrarian thing. And the problem with it is it's no less controlled. It's the person who's kind of consciously alternative in everything, and it's, as soon as it becomes mainstream, then it's not theirs anymore. There's a comic, a web comic, a great web comic I used to read that they had a character who was very, very into music, and this resonates for me as a teenager. Very obscure music, and the Venn diagram was music I like, music you like, and in the middle at the overlap was music I used to like. And I think that the problem is that your people, your taste is no less defined by others when you view the world that way too. And it's actually, you're right, it becomes back to that belonging in the self and the centering in the self. Is what is me here? What is a sincere expression? And I think I stay away from authenticity. I find authentic a difficult word because it suggests a certain continuity that I'm not that comfortable with. So I tend to say sincere because it feels more about presence.
I like one of my 3 Ps, presence.
Because I can be sincere in the present, but authentic's kind of and I can know if something's sincere in the present, but authentic feels like a slightly different question, and it's not always a helpful question for me.
I actually really like that distinction. I really like that distinction. And presence is, when I'm present, 1 minute my authentic self might be very different to another minute. So I like that you've given another level of understanding around that. Because what's being authentic anyway, isn't it? It's just being true to you in that moment. Yeah.
And we have these different aspects of ourselves, right? And we express them differently in different contexts. And it's like, that's really, really hard, and and I think I noticed another comment from Sherry, like Vegemite. Yeah, I think the Vegemite Marmite thing is really interesting because they are basically the same thing. Yeah. And everyone the whole world that isn't British or Australian thinks they're revolting, but for Brits and Australians, it's largely like Brits would say Marmite is great and Vegemite is revolting, and Australians the other way around. And it showed, so there is something in this categorization thing, and what did Freud call it? The narcissism of small differences. That also plays into this whole thing about like what is different? Why am I not fitting in with someone who's basically the same as me by everyone else? But we're kind of clashing on this, and I think that different aspects of the self, because no one's ever going to have all of the same aspects, but temporarily we might line up completely. And that's a really interesting thing to negotiate and to explore. And it doesn't stay the same over time. It's absolutely embedded in context. So I think
comes back to context, which is what we were talking about at the beginning. But it also makes me think about, you can be different people, you know, we have different hats, but all the hats, you know, and I'd like to think it's not different hats, it's the same hat, but we just might just do this a little bit, just turn it around a little bit. And I can be, you know, really playful and full of like excitement and energy with one group of people, and then you take me out of that group of people, and then I'm a really calm and hugely present and wise being that is completely the opposite nearly of the other crazy girl, and yet I'm both, and I sometimes wondered, who of the two am I, or who of the however, and I'm all of it. And to know that I am not necessarily putting on an act, I'm just in that group of people, this part of me is sparked. And that's,
I love that.
Yeah,
I really like that. Yeah, it's absolutely it. I think relating to the fitting in and belonging to oneself is, do I enjoy that being sparked in me?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
You know, is that something I like? Is that something I value?
Yeah.
Because there are some people who I just don't like I don't like the person I am when I am around them. It's a sincere reaction.
Yes.
But I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy me.
That's important to know. Yeah.
In that circumstance. And I think that being able to choose that and play with that, experiment with those spaces and the ability to explore that feels like a huge part of moving past the fitting in and the inclusion thing.
Yeah. But for you to be able to ask those questions, you've got to find a way to be present with yourself and learn to be present with yourself, even if not on that moment, because you might you won't be able to be present in that way, reflective, but learning to be reflective if you find yourself discombobulated, then that is a good skill to have, I think. To get
the first step of always spotting that it's happened, isn't it? It's like, okay, I'm there. So where do we go? That's always the kind of trick, rather than being like, oh god, it's all gone wrong, you end up in a cycle of it going, it just spirals. Whereas the ability to be with it, I think this is a really interesting thing, and I think it comes back to this, the role of creativity and the, like, you know, one of the weird experiences I have is I free write quite a lot for this. So I just like kind of no filter, just write. It's a strange practice because really weird things come out of your fingers. And actually that practice of letting it go and being like, well, okay, can I be with the weirdness, with my own weirdness here? You know, and I suspect the doodling thing feels quite, you know, like a similar practice in some ways.
Totally. It is exactly like free writing. Like it depends what I use it for, because sometimes I use it a lot. I had to do online courses, and I use obviously my doodles in the courses, and sometimes they have to express a certain something, but sometimes I just sit and I literally go, I don't know what I'm going to doodle. And usually when I don't know what I'm going to doodle, I doodle a flower to start off with, and sometimes it's just a line. But I do visual storytelling or illustrating, or sometimes I literally just sit and see where it takes me. So this process I actually use in my work as well, and to connect to the heart and actually doodle from the heart and bring in a contemplation prompt, and I will never know what I'm going to create before I start. And then something really interesting happens, and then I usually get a bit like you end up having something on the page that you would never have thought of adding. And I think because it's the space where we're getting we're becoming part of the greater, the all encompassing being. It's and in that space you're guided, and there is 100%. You're not even questioning belonging. You're not questioning fitting in. There's no questioning. There's actually just being, and then from that place you can really create and some powerful stuff, I think.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And I think for me, though, one of the assumptions I carried about this, and this is one of the things one of the ways I like to kind of summarize some of those conversations is think about things that as a result of the fact that we don't have to do stuff we don't have to do anymore, stuff we don't have to worry about quite so much. And this idea that, first of all, we don't necessarily have to worry entirely about fitting in. That's we can work on our own space, but equally that idea of being able to do things without clearly like having any intention behind them. They're like completely just the thing happening for its own sake. But also, for me, I think when I read about, or I kind of came across these ideas before, I was like, well, why I can't do that? I can't do that because I can't, because I never actually tried or sat down, and I didn't know where to start. And it's interesting you said, you've got a framework. It's like, when you say you're letting this free run, it's like it isn't quite the same as just, there are things you can do to kind of bring it about. And I think and that's not cheating. That's part of it. And for me, the writing's the same. It's like, okay, I have the right context and it comes, probably, maybe. But first of all, it doesn't have to, because if it has to, then it won't. And there's things you can do to kind of bring yourself and play with this space and find out what's useful for you. So I think, and this is where I really want to bring in, we're coming to the end of the show. So like, what if anyone wants to follow this up and explore some of this stuff? Is there anything you'd like to kind of share to maybe help them with that?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I bring in is my 3 keys, and you actually mentioned one of them is be present. So it's to be present, which kind of brings us into our body. So we use our breath to bring us into our body. Quite often when we're feeling like we're not fitting in, we kind of jump out of ourselves and jump into our head, and we're out of our body. So we need to bring ourselves into our body and ground ourselves. Breath is the easiest, simplest way to do that. Movement as well. And the second key is curiosity, because often we're in a place of judgment, particularly when we're trying to fit in. We're judging others because we're actually telling them they're different than us. We're judging ourselves for being different to others. So judgment is an unhelpful thing. We all do it. It's not something that we should beat ourselves up about it, because we do it. We try and keep safe. But if we can apply curiosity instead and really train ourselves to look at it from a place of wonder, and I like to think of it as not question, not analyze it, but go, wow, I wonder. There's a whole different feel to that, isn't it? It's playful, it's curious. And the third key that I use, and I apply this in every which way in my life, in my work, is kindness. And it's much needed. And by that, kindness is not just being nice. Kindness is actually also being incredibly truthful, but understanding also what it is you need. Because right often in those moments we need something that we're not given, and we're trying to meet our needs. And asking yourself, what is it actually you truly need, is very helpful, because often it's just a question of, well, I need to give myself some more patience, or I need to give myself some more loving, or I need to actually accept myself as I am. What is it I need? And I do that, bring people to the heart. This is why I'm called the Heartworker. And you can find more on my website, theheartworker.com. But I bring people to their hearts, because that to me is where courage lives, is where compassion lives. And also creating from the heart brings a very playful thing out in the world, and then it doesn't become about our ego. It actually we can be much freer creatives, and then really impact our lives and our world in a very, very playful way. So those are 3 keys that I bring in, and then I use doodling for those that love it in my online courses or my group, and in my one-on-one conversations. So I work with people one-on-one as well. Those are feeling a little lost in life and trying to find their way forward, a way that makes sense to them, and because they feel like they're no longer fitting. Maybe they've outgrown where they are, or maybe they just never fit it where they where they are.
I think for me, that idea that my home wasn't the village, my home was somewhere off the path, somewhere weird, and I'm comfortable there, more comfortable there than ever anywhere else. And I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to work with people around, and I'm so glad that you're doing that. So yeah, I'd really encourage anyone to check out Anne's work as a way of kind of engaging with that, and the play part is so important for this.
Yes. And it is important. And I play a lot with my doodles as well. If you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook and the Heartworker, you'll find a lot of my doodle work there as well. I like to share a lot of my doodles just for fun, or my little doodle stories. They can find out a little bit more about me as well.
Fantastic, great. And there's links to Anne's website and to the book or ebook in the guide in the show notes. So that's so please do check that out. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was really, really interesting one. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome. And thank you everyone in the audience for watching, and thank you for your comments. Really great to have you watching. It really is your support and your viewership that makes it possible. I love having these conversations, but without having some audience, it is just me kind of giving an excuse to talk to people I want to talk to. So thank you very much for watching. Do share this with anyone you think is, who you think it would help, would be interested, and share your own views on it too, whether you liked it or not. I really do want to engage and carry on with that conversation, and do get in touch with either of us too and carry on that conversation. Other shows and recordings are available on YouTube, and you can also find other episodes, or if you search Delightful Dissent on your favorite podcast platform, it's all available there. You can also find a group of us doing this kind of work at divergentpathfinders.com, and there will be the show will move over to there at some point relatively soon, so do keep an eye on that. I do hope it's got you kind of thinking, and just reach out and ask if it did, and you've got any questions or you want to explore anything further. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Elizabeth Arifian, and the assumption we're going to be talking about, which feels quite relevant, is that you think with your brain.
Huh?
So I love the way these work together without any intention, without any formal planning at all. So much of how we understand the world is physical, and how we explore the world and express ourselves is through our body. We carry this assumption that we just think with our brain. And I think there's something really interesting in this work, particularly around how different embodiment, different modes of expression, and different ways of thinking all play out with each other. And I'm really looking forward to getting into this one, because I think it's a really, really interesting space, and this is an assumption I want challenged personally. It's one of the big ones for me. So that's going to be in 2 weeks' time. That's going to be on Tuesday the 7th of August at 1 p.m. UK time. I'd love for you to join us then, but in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thank you very much, and goodbye.